Josh, are you an NPC?
Yes, and I'm aware that I am an NPC, but it bothers me massively as
Well, well, hold on. Let's delve into that. So, when you say NPC, what are you saying? That are you aware that you have internalized opinions, ethics, morals, ways, heuristics, lenses, way of looking at the world from others, and that these now have become yourself? This is how you perceive reality. Is that what you're trying to say?
in ways, yes, but by the stance where I consider myself an NPC, no. I am very objective and can accept pretty much any conversation or outcome. By the point where I am an NPC is from these videos of the walking zombies on their phone staring at technology way too often. You tell yourself that you work online. I do work online, but that is no excuse to consume data all day. We produce so little and consume all day, every day. The lack of curiosity that brings with it, as Mr. Alan Bloom said, when you take off the Walkman, you will be, or he was afraid that when his students took off the Walkmans that they would be dead. Today, I think when you put down your phone, your identity is gone and curiosity dies with it.
No, I agree. I agree. But my point on this front is to draw a very, very nuanced description between these two things. And here's what I mean by that. If we try, or if I tried to go through and look at everything, like try to understand everything to the maximum depth, like I wouldn't be able to do it. A good example is think about Jordan Peterson when he talks about the fovea in our eyes. Like what we see, like right now I'm looking right down the barrel of the camera, and like I can see that very clearly. I can read the text written around the edge, and I can't really see the stuff, around me. And Peterson makes a comment like if we wanted to have that high level of resolution right here for everything, we look like cone heads, right? You have this big ass, because that's how much processing power is needed for this. And so my point on this is that we have to adapt heuristics. We have to adapt shortcuts in a sense, right? This is be like kind of like the NPC thing, saying like, okay, listen, I'm not going to think too much in depth. I might just run the most cursory of like mental audits on it. But that being said, it's generally accepted. This is the consensus monster, by the way. It's generally accepted. We're going to bring it in. My favorite example is like traffic lights. We stop at red lights, we go at green lights, okay? For most parts. But let's say you always stop at a red light or you always go at a green light. If there's a cop, fire truck, ambulance coming up behind you, lights red, no, you run the light, or you look around, you make sure you're not running, and then you pull through the intersection to let that go through. Likewise, if the light turns green and people still running it, you don't go. So my point is that when it comes to these heuristics, when it comes to like, the NPC thing or the consensus, like we have to do it. And so my argument is like, yes, we have to do shortcuts. I think the problem, and this is where the NPC thing comes in, it's not necessarily the adoption and even the wholesale adoption of these shortcuts, these heuristics. It's the blindness to the fact you've adopted the shortcuts. It's not seeing the shortcut as a shortcut. It's not seeing the heuristic as a heuristic. Because when you have that, as you say, you lose the spark of curiosity, and there's no audit mechanism. There's no update mechanism, as there will undoubtedly need to be audits and update mechanisms. My immediate family, they're all very well educated, either PhDs, masters, or whatever, right? Ivy League or Stanford is where they went to. And you have people who on paper are very, very smart, but it's a very, I think, interesting perversion of the word of intelligence. Here's my example. If you have people that think that they are smart, they would think, well, because I'm smart, I'm never going to make a stupid mistake. Because I'm never going to make a stupid mistake, I'm not going to devote the mental bandwidth to doing an audit of myself to see if I made a stupid mistake. So then what happens? Life goes on. And because they never audit themselves to see if they made a stupid mistake, they never perceive that they made a stupid mistake, even if they did. But because they never perceive it, they have confirmation bias for themselves that they've never made a stupid mistake. And so like they shut off like the one component that's designed to do like the self-audit and report back, say, hey, listen, there might be an issue with this heuristic or whatever, that component's been defunded internally. As Bloom would say, this is the closing of the American mind, right?
Where does this derive from? I think it originates from the school system. As Yuri Bezmenov would say, it is a long process through the school systems of
Demoralization.
killing the curiosity of students, and that is done by preventing the ability to make mistakes. The only incentive you have in school is to pass, get good grades, because therefore you are told you will get a good job. You will never have to think again. You can go through the motions of life. You are taught that making mistakes is wrong, when, as we know, that the biggest growth comes from your biggest mistakes. When we are told our whole life that it is objectively wrong to make mistakes, you grow up trying your hardest and rebelling against any mistake you could possibly make and just putting it as an off thought. to where you'll never have to believe such a thing.
Exactly. And I would say the school system is a big one. The other thing I would say is that you have like this digital echo chamber to manage perception. That's probably another big one. Because think about it, like if you didn't, what's the latest example? Like if you don't toe the party line, like it was a Babylon Bee, right? They intentionally made a joke about the human secretary, I think, or whatever, right? And the point is they were kicked off Twitter in that regard. And so, like, I would say it's not only the closing down the spark of curiosity from the education system, but it's the jackboot conformity that's enforced. And the thing is, like, this is the thing that just blows my mind, is that the very people who would, in the most strongest of voices, decry, like, oh, I'm never going to be, a fascist or anything like that, or racist. These are the very people that are doing anything but. Like, these are the most fascist, racist, bigoted people you've ever seen. And this gets back why I say, like, because they think that they are on the top of the mountain and they are beyond reproach, they think that whatever they do, it's like they think their shit don't stink or whatever, right? And they don't like check for any actions. And so you like mechanism they should have to like raise the flag and say, hey, listen, maybe we've got a problem, is the very mechanism that's been I would argue it's been intentionally reduced, but that's tinfoil hatties.
And where did this come from? Dietrich Bonhoeffer is in his theory of stupidity. He was taken by the Nazi Germany's, and because he was rebelling, saying what we are doing is wrong. We should not be doing this. I mean, we are killing innocent people, quite literally. And he was in the streets, and eventually he got taken and sent to prison and eventually hung. But his outcome was that stupidity is much more dangerous than evil people, because the stupid people do not know that they are doing stupid things. They believe that since they are not wrong and they did not make a mistake, they are accepting the consensus monster, they are correct, and they will blindlessly throw just regurgitated information back at you like an NPC player would. They cannot think for themselves and don't try to, because they are programmed not to.
Yeah. And just to be clear, there's nothing necessarily wrong with taking a heuristic or taking like an NPC thought off the shelf, because we all have to do it. I do it, you do it, everyone does it. The failure is not understanding or not remembering that the heuristic you've taken off the shelf is just a heuristic, meaning you might need to uninstall it or update it at a certain point in time. You know what it's like, Josh? Forgive the economics analogy. It's like people who imagine like a heuristic has like counterparty risk to it, right? Like from the mental perspective. But until you have the kind of person that blows up, it's very useful to put into the monetary pyramid. And so what people will do is they'll take these heuristics, use it as foundational layers, and they say this must be true. It must always be true, because it's always going to be true. I can like base my worldview upon it. And the answer is, well, it might be true most of the time, but you can't say it's going to be true all the time. And at the same time, too, you still need to have an update mechanism, in place to deal with this. And I guess the other thing, too, just not to get too off topic here, but like, if you really want to go down to the bedrock of like, truth to build a worldview on, like it's a dark road. I mean, like, let's just say many people don't wish to go down to that level.
Yeah, Justin, to repeat the same question you asked me, would you consider yourself an NPC?
Me? Would I? I would say on some things, undoubtedly. But what's the litmus test to think if you, Josh, me, Justin, or the viewer, or whatever is an NPC? If you think you're not an NPC, you probably are. That's the thing in that front. So then what I would say is, well, if you're all NPCs, well, what are you going to do about it? Okay, great. Then I would say it's just to be aware of like, well, look, I understand I've got to do mental shorthanding for some things, okay? And that also means that like, and maybe there's something people have to answer individually or whatever, right? But to say like, at least be aware, leave the door open, even if it's only ajar, saying, what if there's something that I'm, like all the things that I'm absolutely certain about, like the base layer counterparty risk-free asset of how I've constructed my, internal ego, like my emotional economy or whatever, right? Whatever the underlying, core asset is. You always want to leave the door just a little bit ajar to say, okay, listen, what if there's some issue? I mean, what if a central bank's, USD treasuries are suddenly, sanctioned for us or whatever? That's I think the best defense you can have.
Coming at it with humility and always being open and agnostic to any outcome, to not die hard, to not have your emotional and psychological bedrock, as Justin was saying, be an object or a thought. You have to be a flowing creature, because facts change and you have to change with them. If you continue to reject mistakes and any failure, then you will never succeed in anything. I think that is the main point of the video, to be humble and to know that you are an NPC player and to accept it, but to try and crack your own armor.
What I would say is, like, if you think, and you pat yourself, give yourself a pat on the shoulder and think, I'm such a virtuous person because, I'm not an NPC, that's probably the biggest tell that you are an NPC. And again, like I said, everyone is, we all, as Scott Adams would say, we all have our opinions assigned to us. Even if you're aware that your opinions are being assigned to you, they still are assigned to you. But if you're at least aware of it, then what's the phrase? What, forewarned is forearmed, or whatever the fancy way of saying it is. So at least if you're aware of this dimension, you might have a chance of not, I don't say pushing back, but you might have a chance of identifying things where the consensus monster is wrong. Because oftentimes, believe it or not, the consensus monster is right, which is how it's supposed to be. The problem is that, like, I think it was Reagan that said, there's two things that get you into trouble in life. What you don't know, you don't know. Everyone already knows that. But the other one, which people aren't as aware of, what you do know, that just ain't so.
Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next one.